Well, thank you for joining us for Almost Persuaded. My name is Alan Hall, and I'm the pastor of Good News Church in York, Pennsylvania. If you have your Bibles today, if you'll turn to the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 40. Genesis chapter 40, and I want to speak to you today on the subject of the right way to deal with waiting. The right way to deal with waiting. Let me begin by telling you a story from my own life. Years ago, between my freshman year of college and my sophomore year of college, I knew I had to make a lot of money if I was going to be going back in the fall. And I had several yards lined up to mow over the summer, and pretty sizable yards. And I knew that was going to keep me busy, but the food or the money for it wasn't going to be enough. And so I decided to get another job, and so I started going around applying at different places, and actually got hired at two places. One was working at like a pastry company, like chicken and dumplings, chicken and pastry, and they made the pastry, and it was a Christian organization, and it was a good place to work, great people to work with, and I enjoyed that. But I would have to be there at 7 in the morning, and I would get off at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then Hardee's called. The restaurant chain called me and wanted to know if I would work the drive-through and a couple of nights during the week, and then also on the weekends on Saturday. And so I agreed to that. So I was working 3 jobs during the summer, trying to get enough money to pay for college in the fall, and that's exactly what happened. I had just enough to get going, and then of course had to work during the year to do that. But you know, life was, looking back, life was very busy during that time. Very hectic, frantic even. But I don't ever remember being what we call today stressed out. You know, I don't even think that was a term that we used back then, being stressed out. But I'm sure there was a lot of stress to deal with. You know, those jobs taught me a lot of good and valuable lessons. One was to work hard. That, you know, if you had a goal and if you worked hard, you know, you could accomplish that goal. I also learned by working those jobs to be, you know, to be honest in dealing with people and money and different things like that, and also to be faithful, to be on time. Those were valuable lessons. Probably one of the most important and most valuable lessons I learned was how to deal with other people. You know, how to get along with coworkers, and how to get along with the company, and how to get along with customers. You know, one of the things that I was always taught, you don't see practice as much today as it used to be, but that is that the customer is always right. Customer is always right, you know, and you did what you could to please the customer. You continued to smile, you continued to go overboard in order to make sure that customer was satisfied. Well, that takes us to what happened one Saturday evening as I was working the drive-thru at Hardee's. And a fellow pulled up. I could hear him coming for a long ways away. Had the headset on. I was taking orders, not only taking orders, but filling orders or passing the orders to the customers. But I was taking that order. He drives up to the drive-through speaker, and he has the world's loudest pickup truck. I mean, you know, you could hear him coming from blocks away. It was that loud. And so he pulls up, and he actually turns his key off when he's ordering. I mean, I couldn't have heard him if he hadn't. And so he begins to order. Now, he doesn't tell me, you know, just, you know, the drink, the fries, the burger, whatever. No, he starts demanding that I make these certain things for him, and that it better be done right once he got it. And so he, you know, just the tone of his voice, you know, it was speaking down to me. I mean, I didn't know the guy, he didn't know me. You know, but this better be done, and this better be done right. Well, I said, okay, and we'll get that for you, and told him the total to pull up to the window. And he turned the ignition again, and of course you could hear that truck begin to rumble, and, you know, even shaking the glass that was in the window beside us. And so I could tell he was getting agitated, because he started revving his motor up over and over. And then it wasn't too long, I mean, he only had a couple of vehicles in front of him. It wasn't too long, he started honking his horn, you know, like it was going to hurry things up or something, you know. And he started doing that. And then when it came his time to come up to the window, I opened the window to take his money from him, and he began to curse at me. I mean, he started cursing at me and started cursing Hardee's and, telling us how sorry we were. And I think he probably cursed everybody in America that night. I mean, he was just upset, red in the face. And so I remember that lesson kicked in. Customer's always right. And so I took his money, continued to smile, got his food, handed it back to him, thanked him for coming, and shut the window. And that was that. He kind of drove off, with his food. But the reason I shared that story with you today is because it's proof that there is a right way to handle those times when we're waiting, and then there's the wrong way of handle those periods of waiting. His, of course, was the wrong way. Now, I don't think I've ever met a person that likes to wait. I mean, we get so impatient. We want things done. We want them done right away. And besides, waiting is boring, right? Waiting is inconvenient. It's no fun. But waiting is something that all of us must do from time to time. And so we need to figure out what is the best way to do that. How can I wait in the right way? As a pastor, I've often spent a lot of time in waiting rooms, hospitals and medical buildings, and I found that those places, you can witness all kinds of human emotions. There is the anxiousness of waiting to hear the results of someone's test or procedure. There is the agony of waiting to see if somebody's going to make it. There is the joy of getting the good news from the doctor, and then there's, at the other end of the spectrum, there is the heartbrokenness of hearing the bad news. Well, these waiting rooms are difficult. They can be very challenging, very trying. And yet throughout our lives here on this earth, we have many experiences that develop into waiting rooms. It may be that you're waiting to hear about a new job. It may be that your health has put you into a waiting room. It may be that the opportunities that you thought would have come already have not come, and so you wait. But regardless of what kind of waiting room that you find yourself in, it's difficult. It's hard to deal with because we want answers, we want resolve, we want results, and we want it now. Well, here in our text that's before us from Genesis 40, we find a man here by the name of Joseph, one of my favorite characters in all the Bible. Joseph finds himself in a waiting room. The Bible tells us that he was in prison. At this particular time, he was in prison on false charges. But while he is in prison, he meets two men, one of those being the cupbearer, or the butler of the king. The other one was the baker. And each of these two men had a dream that troubled them. They didn't know what it meant. And so they began to talk to Joseph about it. And Joseph said, well, I can interpret your dream. God can help me to do that. Do you want me to do that? And they said, oh, of course, we want to know. And so Joseph interprets their dreams. And similar things in each dream, but of course the end result was very different because the baker's dream, Joseph said, meant that the baker in 3 days was going to be taken out of the prison, but he was going to be hanged. He was going to be killed. And then he looked at the cupbearer, and he said to the cupbearer, well, in 3 days for you, you're also going to get out of prison, but you're going to be restored to your previous employment. You're going to go on becoming or being the cupbearer of the king. And sure enough, just as Joseph interpreted, every single thing, every single detail happened. And so notice in verse 14 of our text what it says here. The only thing that Joseph asked for, notice, but think on me, when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Joseph says to the cupbearer, look, I've shown kindness to you, now please show kindness to me. All I want you to do is remember me. Don't forget about me. Say a good word for me when you go before the Pharaoh. But notice what happens in verse 23. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. He was forgotten. Here's a man who loved God, a man who did his best to serve God, to try to do right by others, but yet he finds himself a forgotten and lonely man in prison. He finds himself in a waiting room. Now, according to verse 1 of chapter 41, we know here it tells us that he waited for 2 years. That's a long time. He waited for 2 years because the butler forgot about him. And we're not told anything about anything exciting that happened during those 2 years. You know, I'm sure that it was probably dull. It was monotonous. He probably got tired of staring at the same prison walls day after day and month after month. But that's usually the way it is when we're in our waiting rooms of life. They're dull. They're monotonous. Nothing seems to happen. You just wait and you wait and you wait. And that's no fun. Well, there's several thoughts that I want to share with you today that I believe that will help us to deal with waiting in the right way. The first one is this. We should not be surprised by times of waiting. We should not be surprised by our times of waiting. 1 Peter 4 verse 12 says, Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. If you read through any of the books of the Bible, you'll find some good people, some godly people, people that were serving God, but they found themselves in some trying times. They found themselves dealing with difficulty and disappointment and frustration and all kinds of hardship. I mean, I think about Abraham. Abraham and Sarah, you remember that couple that desired children so much? They prayed for children, they longed for children, and yet God made them wait. Even when God promised them, hey, you're going to have a son, He still made them wait. That had to be hard on them. I think about Moses. Moses had to know that God was going to use him in a great way. I mean, he had to know that. I mean, with the ability that he had and the know-how that he had and his willingness to serve God. But yet what happens when he leaves Egypt that first time, fleeing for his life? God puts him on the backside of the desert tending livestock for 40 years. 40 years before God would call him back to Egypt to lead his people out of that bondage. And then we know that after he got them out of Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea, then they basically wandered around in circles for 40 years because they didn't believe God when they got to the Promised Land, you know, that He was going to take care of them, that He was going to fight their battles. And so they ended up wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. And then at the end of the 40 years, Moses didn't even get to go into the Promised Land because, of course, he had not believed God. He had not exercised faith in front of the people. He had lost his temper in striking the rock instead of speaking to it. Well, disappointment comes to all of us. I mean, don't think you're immune to disappointment, and don't think you're the only one that suffers through disappointment and trying times. You know, things don't always go the way that we expect them to. People we love die. We don't always get the credit that we deserve. Sometimes, you know, we're the victims of injustice. Sometimes life can be a struggle. You know, I don't think I've ever met anyone who had more ups, or heard about anyone who had more ups and downs than Joseph did. I mean, he went from being daddy's favorite to being a slave. And then he went from being just an average slave to being, you know, basically in command in Potiphar's house, looking after Potiphar's affairs. And then because he's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife of impropriety, then, you know, he's thrown into prison. And then he waits in prison for 2 years. And then he's let out. And he becomes second in command in all of Egypt. I mean, up and down, up and down. Joseph must have thought, roller coasters weren't invented back then. But using that comparison, he must have thought he was on a roller coaster. You know, all the ups and downs of life. So it shouldn't surprise us when we have those times of waiting. Number 2, we must learn to trust in God alone when we have to wait. To trust in God alone. Jeremiah 17:5 says, Thus saith the Lord, Cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from the Lord. So cursed be the man that trusteth in man. So the opposite of that would be, blessed is the man that that trust in God. Trust in God. Joseph's life was filled with lots of changes. But no matter what the change was, no matter what he was facing, you find one thing that never changed. One thing that was always constant, and that was God. God was always true. God was always with him every single step of the way. And you find all the way through Joseph's life, Joseph put God first in those things that he did. Joseph's faith was in God. There's no doubt. His faith was not in Potiphar. And it wasn't in the cupbearer. And his faith wasn't in even the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. No matter what situation he found himself in, Joseph knew that God was with him. You know, when we find ourselves in a waiting room, we must trust in God and God alone. We must believe in the promise that Jesus gave us, that he will never leave us nor forsake us. I hope you'll hold on to that truth today, that promise. I don't know what you're going through. It might be difficulty today for you, a trying time for today, a stressful day, or your day might be going great today, but tomorrow those things might come. Whatever you're faced with from day to know that if you're a believer, that you have someone to call on, you have someone to go with you through those trying times, and his name is Jesus. So we must learn to trust in God alone when we have to wait. Number 3, when we have to wait, we need to listen for what God may be trying to teach us. We need to ask ourselves 2 questions. First of all, we need to ask ourselves, is there something that God is trying to teach me? You know, in the classroom that God has put me in this life, is he trying to teach me something? The story is told of a French engineer named Ferdinand de Lesseps, who was traveling on the Mediterranean Sea one time when he was aboard this ship, and there was a contagious disease on board that ship. It was found out by the ship's doctor someone had it. And so the ship's doctor put the whole ship under quarantine. In other words, no one could get on, no one could get off until this was cleared up. Well, this was very frustrating to this young engineer. And to help pass the time, he began to read the memoirs of Charles Lapierre, who had studied the feasibility of building a canal from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. Nothing had ever been done, but he had studied the feasibility of it. And so Ferdinand was reading that, and it led him to draw up the plans of constructing the Suez Canal, which was completed under his leadership. And so that quarantine, that time of waiting, that very frustrating time on board that ship for him, proved to be very valuable, not only to Ferdinand, but to the whole world, because that canal was built. You know, sometimes God has to slow us down long enough so he can teach us something. We're so busy, aren't we? We're so running, we run here, we run there, we accomplish this thing on the list. We're always doing something. Even when we're doing nothing, we're doing something, right? You know, I know that's the case with me. I think I'll sit down and rest, but while I'm sitting there, you know, I'm reading, or I'm checking my email, or you know, I'm studying over something, or I'm calling someone on the phone, or it's constant. And sometimes God just has to throw up the stop sign in our life and say, "Whoa, you need to stop. I'm trying to talk to you here. I'm trying to teach you something. Now listen to what I'm about to say." The second question we need to ask ourselves is there something God is attempting to change in my life? Is there something he's trying to change in my life? You know, I don't know about you, but I fear that I've wasted a lot of my life, you know, in the waiting rooms because I wasn't asking the right questions. I wasn't asking God, what are you trying to teach me? God, what are you trying to change in my life? You know, I'm guilty many times of asking the questions, God, why are you doing this? You know, God, why is this happening to me? God, help me to understand. Well, you know what I found out? I don't have to understand everything. I don't have to have all the details. I just need to know that God knows where I am and know that God is working. He is working. I don't see the whole plan like He sees it, but He's working in my life, and He is trying to change me or trying to teach me in some way. Number 4, while we're waiting, we must trust in God's timing. In God's timing. Chapter 41, verses 1 through 15. In that passage, we're told that Pharaoh, king of Egypt, has a couple of dreams. Kind of unusual dreams for us today. Probably very natural dreams for him during that day. But basically, in the first dream, he saw 7 healthy cows come up out of the Nile River. And then he saw 7 scrawny or skinny cows, malnutrition cows, come up out of the Nile River, and they ate the healthy cows. Now that's a strange dream, isn't it? And it had Pharaoh scratching his head. He woke up from that dream and he thought to himself, wow, what a weird dream. Why did I dream that? I think I'll just go back to sleep and just kind of forget about it. And so he went back to sleep and he dreamed another dream. And this time it was even a little more strange than the first one. Because the second time he dreamed about 7 healthy heads of grain. And then he dreamed about 7 thin heads of grain. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 healthy heads. Now, I've seen cows eat, but I've never seen corn eat. I've never seen grain in the field eat. But this had to be strange to him. And the Bible says that he woke up and he was troubled. His soul was vexed. And he said, somebody's got to explain this to me. This is such a strange dream. Somebody somewhere is trying to tell me something. And of course, the Egyptians were very superstitious. They had plenty of gods. And he said, maybe one of the gods is trying to tell me something. I've got to find out what this means. And so he began to consult all his wise men of Egypt. And nobody could help him. Not one could explain such strange dreams. And then finally, all of a sudden, that cupbearer. Remember the cupbearer that was with Joseph, and Joseph interpreted his dream? The cupbearer said, oh, I know somebody. It's like a light bulb went off above his head. I remember somebody. His name is Joseph, I think. And he was, oh no, he's back in prison. I forgot about him. Pharaoh, I believe if you go and get Joseph out of prison, I think he could probably interpret this dream for you. I mean, he certainly interpreted my dream, and I had a strange dream. And he interpreted the baker's dream, and it was a strange dream. And everything that he said came to pass. So maybe he can help you. Isn't that amazing? The cupbearer remembers Joseph at just the right time. Now don't miss this. It was just the right time. At no other time would any more attention be given to what Joseph had to say. At no other time would God receive more glory than what he's about to receive. So what we've got to do is remember that we've got to trust in God's timing. I know we like things to be done in our order, in our time, but we got to trust in His time, because His time is always going to be best. It's going to be best for us, and it's going to be best for Him as far as receiving glory. Number 5, we must remember that how we respond to waiting is up to us. Everybody has to wait sometime or another, and the what and when of waiting is not up to us, but our response is up to us. In chapter 41, we're told that Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and before Joseph comes, he cleans himself up, he takes a bath, he shaves. By the way, I believe that was very significant, because to the Hebrew, having a beard was something of dignity, of respect. But to the Egyptian, it would have been very disrespectful. And so Joseph, being the respectful young man that he was, shaved his beard before he went before Pharaoh. Now look at what Pharaoh says when Joseph comes before him. Look in chapter 41, verse 15. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. But then I love what Joseph says in verse 16. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Joseph at that point had Pharaoh's ear. He could have said anything that he wanted. I mean, Joseph could have whined about his living conditions back in the dungeon. He could have complained about how long it took the cupbearer to finally remember him. He could have even got upset about how God had allowed him to wait in prison, but he did none of those things. He simply sought to give God the glory of everything, the past, the present, and the future. He not only does that in verse 16 of this chapter, but also in verse 25 and also in verse 32. He wanted Pharaoh to know that Jehovah God was the one who was in control of it all. Folks, that's what we've got to remember. As believers, as children of God, we got to remember that God never sleeps. God never slumbers. He never gets frantic or frazzled. He never wonders about what he's going to do next. He's always in control, never out of control. And he knows at all times where we are, and he knows where he wants to take us through those circumstances that we're going through. You know, we may question what he does. I think that's very natural for us to do sometimes. We may at times not agree with what he does. But know this, he knows what he's doing. And what he does is, again, going to be for our best and what will bring him the most glory. You can count on it. So Pharaoh tells Joseph his dreams, and God uses Joseph to interpret those dreams. Pharaoh is so impressed that he makes Joseph second in command in all of Egypt. But notice this, it was because of the way that Joseph responded to his waiting room experience that led to Pharaoh's thinking and talking about the one true God. You can read that in Genesis 41 verses 37 and 38. He's talking about God here. Think about how many people we could influence to think and talk about God if we were determined to handle our times of waiting like Joseph did. Now think about that. What if we could decide that we were going to give God the glory no matter what? What if we would decide that instead of complaining about our situations, that we were going to praise God instead? What if we would determine that we were going to live for God with all of our strength, and when all of our strength runs out, that we were going to trust in God for His strength to keep us keeping on for Him? Wow, what a difference we could make. Do you think the world would notice? Absolutely they would notice. You can read about the end result in the latter part of this chapter in verses 39 through 40. You know, Joseph probably had no idea what God was doing with his life, but he did understand this. God always has a bigger plan than what we can see. You see that plan coming about in the remaining part of Genesis. Are you waiting for something today? Are you waiting for someone? Are you waiting for a dream to come or a situation to work out? You may be waiting on a direction or peace. You may be waiting on a crisis or a difficult time in your life to end. Whatever your waiting experience may be, I encourage you to do as Joseph did. Listen for God's voice. Trust in God's wisdom. Lean on God's strength. Respond by giving God the glory. And let it start right now by talking to God about your waiting room crisis.